Hello, I'm in Wales in the UK. I'm in Cardiff, and I just attended the Compassionate Mental Health retreat or summit, and I just wanted to share what an incredible experience I had. So I'm going to start with on my way here, I was in the car with my husband. He was dropping me off, and he was thinking like Wales, like that's such a random place to go for a summit. It's like he was thinking he's heard of London and, big cities, but Wales. And I was thinking about it on my way and thought, yeah, that is an interesting location. And then suddenly it dawned on me. When I did the chakra healing program, where the spiritual mentor I worked with went through each chakra and showed me the past life that caused the most trauma or blocking of the energy in each chakra, and then would share in intricate detail with me what she saw. And I would see all this resonance with things that triggered me in my current life that were threads from these past lives. And we would actually go through each one. She would heal some of it, and then I would do it during the week, and we progressed. And I saw massive transformation happen over the course of the 8 weeks that we did the program, that I mentioned in the first episode for this, the sense of adventure. Essentially, what I remembered was that the chakra in the second, or the life in the second chakra, the first one that was shown, was in this area. It was basically Wales and Ireland and Wales, like in that arena. She didn't know exactly where, but then I thought like, wow, what an interesting coincidence. My higher self has been guiding me to heal the second chakra, right below the navel, and the fifth chakra, over the last like 4 or 5 months. So maybe it's to take me to deeper wounds, into like the place where I experienced it, for even deeper layers that I can go into and heal. So I was really intrigued and a little nervous about what I was going to run into. And so when I came to the summit and they had me stay, at the house, gorgeous property, it feels like I stepped into, like, I was transported into an ancient, like they preserved it. It looks like it's out of the 1600s. So, forests and ivies and gorgeous sculptures and just really quaint, gorgeous little organic gardens. And the property is just really stunning, really charming. Charming little place. You can see what it looks like. It's like something out of ancient times. They've preserved this gorgeous place. Let's see what it looks like. Anyway, the room that they had me stay in coincidentally had a little Ganesh. For those of you who don't see elephant, the god that looks like an elephant, the Indian god, over in my room in a really old frame. I thought, like, that doesn't seem very Welsh. It's like, felt kind of random that there's this super ancient frame with Ganesh in it. And the reason I was struck by that is just a couple of weeks ago, I had a reading done by an organization called Ascension that basically looks at what level of ascension are you of the 5 in the physical plane and then 3 more in the non-physical, and said that I was at the 3rd one, which means 60% of my chakras have cleared the trauma. It's like a tipping point. And then they help you get to the higher levels of ascension. But they said they share with you who the ascended master is that's working with you. And they said that there's 42 ascended masters on the earthly plane. There's many that are non-physical, and they're working with all of humanity at this point to try to accelerate ascension, because there's an urgency right now for getting humanity to points of enlightenment for the next era that's going to apparently start in 2027. So they said to me that Ganesh was actually the ascended master that's been working with me. So I thought that was an interesting coincidence. And then in my room, there's a stone carving on the wall of a woman holding a little baby. And the reason that was interesting is that when the second life that was shown to me was, my name was Gail, and I was part of a pagan tribe out here, really small tribe. And they were, pretty, like, I think the leadership was pretty authoritarian and pretty cruel even. And because I was a 2nd or 3rd daughter, I wasn't supposed to have children, and I ended up getting pregnant. But the child died in stillbirth, choked with the umbilical cord. And then they said that if you have another one, you'll curse the tribe, not just yourself, but the tribe. Ended up getting pregnant again, and this time she actually gave up. I gave up the baby. Had a cleft lip. Apparently the intestines were all twisted up, and so they were going to die anyway. But I didn't know that, and I thought because I cursed the tribe, and they would kill me and the baby, I gave it up. I put it into the river, and then I just wasted away from sadness and died of pneumonia, I think, sometime after that. And what she said was that, those two kids were actually like the same spirit that my two kids are now. And what's interesting, which she didn't know, that my first son, so she said your first son is the first child that you had that had the umbilical cord around its neck and died at stillbirth. And my older son, Kailash, actually used to have breath holding spells when he was from the age of 1 to 2, where he would start crying, he wouldn't take a breath, he'd turn blue, pass out, and have a seizure, a tonic-clonic seizure. It was really scary for us, and it lasted for about a year. And so it was really like a weird coincidence. And then she said, the second son you had, actually had it in the digestive tract, all the intestines all twisted up and would have died anyway. And interestingly, my second son, Akash, had a hernia that we caught at the age of 2 months, and he had to have general surgery to have it repaired. So it was just kind of a wild coincidence. But anyway, that was the life. And in this room, the stone carving of a woman holding a little baby, and then there was a little baby rocking chair. So it was a little eerie. So that was kind of the beginning in this really ancient old property and house. And when they had invited a number of different people, and it was really like they were people that have lived experience. They've had psychotic episodes or severe mental illness, an episode of that. Many of them have been hospitalized. So they had a lot of folks like that had, what we might otherwise think of as schizophrenia or bipolar or psychotic episode. And then there are others that were here, like psychiatrists and psychologists and healers, and people that worked with those that had mental illness, and some of them have even had lived experiences. And then there were parents and siblings and relatives of people that have severe mental illness. So they were all at this place. And what really started to, at first it was interesting because it was like, I almost felt like having a lived experience was a badge of honor and a way to kind of fit in. So I remember saying, like, I have symptoms of bipolar. At one point in my early life, early adulthood, I was diagnosed, but, it ended kind of because it was too minor. But I almost felt like wanting to say that to like kind of feel like I fit in. But then I started having all these mixed emotions. Like, if I talk really fast, are they attributing that to my bipolar, or are they discounting what I say because I'm crazy? And those thoughts were going through my head. And I remember when I was sharing, people asked me where I was from, and I said, from the States. Like, you flew all the way from the States for this? And I just started thinking, like, what? The questions started coming into my mind because I didn't even know how to introduce myself. Like, who am I? Why am I here? And so it was like, I quit my job 10 months ago, and now I'm, life coach and guide. Like, I wasn't sure what to say. And these questions kept popping in my head. Who are you, and why are you here? So I started getting kind of agitated and like distressed. And as I listened to these stories, then what started happening on day 2 was I was so struck by like there was, people who'd been hospitalized many times, but still like had so much light, or like, saw that as like I did, contraction and expansion. Like they went into darkness, and now, they're experiencing expansion, and that's part of, the process of growth. I saw parents that were grieving, like either the loss of a child to mental illness, like who took their life, or who had too many electric shock therapy and had, had brain injury, and were desperately trying to find things to help. Parents that still had kids that were having episodes or had recently episodes, and you could just see the desperation and the desire to find things that would help because they hadn't had success with what they tried so far. And I just was so struck by how deeply human they seemed, like in their pain and their suffering. And I remember I was in a session where they facilitated, letting people share kind of their story. And just the sheer amount of pain and suffering, like I could feel the tenderness of their hearts, like as they opened. And it like took me to tears, just like Thomas Hubel's program. I was really taken to tears, just feeling like the depth of their humanity and what they'd been through, what they'd endured, and what they're still kind of living through. And I'd made all these assumptions, like stereotypes of people, like based on how they looked or what they said, or, the way they spoke. But then like hearing them, it was so deeply human. And it just made me feel really connected to them, and deep respect, an open heart kind of a feeling. So I kind of, like the end of the second day, I had this feeling of like, who am I and why am I here? Like almost like an imposter. I'm not worthy of, like, what do I even have to teach? If anything, I have to learn. Like, again, the question kept, who are you and why are you here? Like, what value do you add? I remember I was and my heart was getting heavier, and I felt like with every story I would hear, as they opened their hearts and shared and got vulnerable, I felt like my heart was breaking. Like it was so heavy, heavier and heavier. And I was like more and more tears to the point where I felt like I had to step away. I couldn't engage. And I went back to my room and I just burst into tears. And then I couldn't stop crying. I ended up trying to go outside into nature to see if it would soothe me. And I was trying to watch the sunset, and it just brought me to more tears. And then there was a horse, kind of a wild horse that came over. Like it saw me and it kind of galloped over, and then it was kind of waiting. It made eye contact with me. So I went a little bit closer, and then it came closer, and I came closer, and then we just stood there watching, and it was almost as if to say, like, I see you, I feel you, or I don't know, it was something really amazing. And then I didn't have the courage to touch the horse, and it like zipped off after a few seconds after like making eye contact with me. But and then that brought me to even more tears, like, and I just was wondering, like, again, who am I and why am I here on earth, like in this role, and I started wondering, like, do I have anything to offer? Like, what is my real journey? Like, did I imagine all of this stuff? Like, am I hallucinating? Am I like, or is this real? Like, those thoughts started coming into my head. I definitely don't feel like doing a video, but I'm gonna do one anyway. I'm in Wills, and it's beautiful. You can see. I've been watching the sunset, and I feel utterly worthless, utterly hopeless. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know who I am. And then I went back to my room, and I fell into an abyss of darkness. Like, my heart was just breaking with the heaviness of it. And I, through all the tears of like, and I'm feeling it now, but wasn't sure if there was even a bottom. Like, I was like, and at first I tried to resist it. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to surrender to what this is. I'm going to assume this isn't bottomless, and there's a reason for it. So I just let the tears flow, and I was in tears for like 3 hours, and I skipped dinner altogether, and I just through the night was like in these tears, like rounds of like sobbing, like ocean of tears that flowed. And at the end of it, when I hit the bottom, there was a bottom. When I hit the bottom and there was no more tears left, the thing that emerged for me was, and the thing I kind of realized that was so incredibly uplifting then, was at the bottom of that well, this event was called By the Well, there was nothing but love and light that was left. And like, what I realized was the space that they'd created in this compassionate mental health, and what they were sharing, and like the sheer amount of vulnerability that people were inspired to, bring up. Essentially, it was them opening their hearts. It's like, and all this pain I could then feel, because when they opened their hearts and I could feel it, it was like we merged. It was like transcendence, like I was talking about before. It's like we became one. And then I could feel as if it was my own, their pain and their suffering and the tenderness of their hearts. And it crushed me. It broke my heart because it was me. And then when I cried and released it, it was like, and I remember being in awe of these like incredible humans, like these magnificent beings that are so rich and so in so much depth of like what they've endured and what they've been through, and how they still seek connection and belonging and ways to continue healing through the darkest that I've certainly ever seen, the darkest moments. So I was in awe of like their magnificence, honestly. Like, again, it was like, who are you and why are you here? Like an imposter I felt. And what I realized was, when they opened their hearts in a space that made it so safe to do it, in this compassionate mental health. So I wanted to also mention Compassionate Mental Health is an organization that helps people that have had psychotic episodes, or severe mental illness episodes, the goal is to prevent them from becoming long-term psychiatric patients. And so they're not anti-medication. They believe that medications are useful when used responsibly and in conjunction with the patient to see what works and what doesn't, and always complementing with other types of support, group support and community, and things like art and music, which they incorporated into this. So I experienced some pretty amazing workshops. As an example, there was a workshop where a woman who had a lived experience herself, her and her husband, and they ran these workshops, and she showed it. I was one of the ones I attended, and she would have someone who's hearing voices actually like share the story, like who are all the voices, and then what's the story behind them, how did they appear. And the one example she gave was one from her husband, where one was the priest that had sexually abused him, that was right in his face saying to him, you're worthless and you caused this, it's your fault. Then it was like his first love that ended up getting pregnant and then drinking bleach and dying. And it was her voice saying, come to me, like, let's be a family again. And then it was his father, who was really critical, used to abuse him physically, and was saying, you're a piece of trash, or you're worthless, in his ear. And then she said, I want you all to say it. She had us role play it. All speak at once. And that's kind of what these people are experiencing. It's from their trauma, and it manifests. The system is trying to like get them to look at this and heal the trauma. And it gets louder and louder and louder, as I've talked about in previous videos. And it dawned on me then, like these voices that people hear that are screaming, how tormented and how scary it is, and how hard it is to block it out. And what she was saying was that a lot of times it happens when they try to go to sleep, so they can't sleep. And then what happens when you don't get enough sleep? You can become psychotic. And then she had another really interesting example where the psychiatrist is asking the child, like, asking Ron, or her husband, do you still have aliens that want to take you away in an alien ship? And he was like, yes. And she's like, okay, we need to up the meds. And then what she was showing us was there was one of these perpetrators, someone who had abused him in some way, that was standing in front of him. And then there were these two beings, they had us role play this out, that were almost like standing guard in front of him, almost as a protective measure against that trauma. And he called out like his space, the two aliens in a spaceship. So it was a visualization, it was a creation of the mind that protected, it was a self-defense mechanism against his trauma, the torment of his trauma. So part of her point, which I thought was really beautiful and so resonant with trauma therapy, is like, can we understand, instead of just telling them that they're hallucinating, something's wrong with them, and then medicate until it's no longer there, can we understand the source of the trauma, the messages that they're getting, the vast intelligence of the system in trying to get them to see the trauma, and can then we help them heal it? And she talked about like different ways to do that. Like you can start to see escape routes. You can start to have a conversation with these voices or these entities to say, can you give me 30 seconds? Or can you, and then increasing it to a minute, to 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and asking really nicely or calmly so it doesn't get more agitated. So she was sharing, and it was really eye-opening to me, and resonant with my experience in terms of we all hear voices. It's just, they're not necessarily as loud because we haven't all had severe trauma. But you hear a devil and the angel, or you have different conflicting voices. Do this, don't do that. I would literally describe it like that, like many different voices from our trauma, the fragments in our system. Internal family systems has the parts. Then as you heal the trauma, those voices start to diminish, and you end up with your higher self becomes stronger and stronger in the system. And then if you tune into that, that's your intuition, your higher self, which is what I've learned. And then as it gets stronger, it can help you, then it guides you and help you actually heal more and more trauma, which is what I've experienced so far. So you start to then hear higher self voices, beings from other dimensions, as I mentioned. It's like you go into these upper realms instead of in the lower realms. You start to move to the upper realms. And whether it's a therapist or a healer or even your higher self, you can then, once they become stronger in your system, the higher self, you can, like I experienced in the last ayahuasca journey, you can go to the lower realms. Like I went to my ancestral trauma in the ayahuasca journey, and my higher self was able to help me heal. And every time I would get caught in that dimension, reliving a severe ancestral trauma, she would remind me to bring my awareness back here. And when I didn't remember, I didn't come back. I'd come back here and I'd ground the energy, open my heart. And when I didn't remember, I would feel what felt like electric shocks, like my neurons firing, to remind me, not get stuck in that state. And I literally described it as teetering on the edge of insanity, because I felt like I could literally go psychotic or depressed because it was so overwhelming to the system. The trauma was so deep. So you can see how if the therapist or your higher self isn't grounded enough, isn't strong enough, then they can't tether to you, they can't pull you back, and you can get stuck in that lower dimension, which is what you see with some people happening. So that was one workshop. There's another workshop that was similar to Thomas Hubel's. So Malcolm Stern ran this one, and he it was fascinating how he did it. He basically, it was a little bit intimidating at first, but he basically got people to stop telling a story and tune into their bodies. And he would pause them whenever they said something like a statement that was obvious, should have a lot of emotion with it. And when he'd get them to slow down and tune into their body, naturally they would move to tears. And then he would start to bring in the group. He would say, I want you to pause and see how you're being received by the group. Really absorb it. And there was so much empathy and connection. And then, he started getting people to tune into that. And then he would have a couple of people like actually put their hands on this person's shoulders or their back as a show of support to help them ground, and there'd be more tears. And they'd literally be like healing. And sometimes he would go up to them and help them ground the energy physically and further healing. So, and the group just felt increasingly connected. And I was feeling the same resonant trauma within my system releasing and healing. And, there were all these tears. So it was really beautiful, fascinating. And then they had, different types of speakers, and workshops. They had, organizations that work with people that hear voices or have schizophrenia or bipolar. They had art therapy, music therapy, working with like clay and doing really cool different types of exercises. And, some programs where they help you taper off the meds, others where they just support you in your meds with other complementary support. So it's just really beautiful organization. Beautiful program, and I was really honored to be here. So thanks. Basically, mine opened too, and then we became one. It was this transcendence, and then I could feel them as if they were me, because it was just an expansion of self. So I could feel their pain and suffering, the tenderness of their hearts, and it broke my heart. It was so heavy and so sad. And each person that I met, it was awe, but then it was, connection and pain and suffering and tenderness. And then when it was too much for me, that's when I had to step away, and I collapsed and into these tears. And what I realized was through the tears, I released that pain and that suffering, and it was transmuted, because I was grounding the whole time. My heart was wide open and I was letting it flow. Basically transmuted that pain into love and light, which is then what I felt when I came out the other end of it. And it was so incredibly moving. Like today I feel full of light, like full of love, like so connected to like nature and the people in this retreat. And we were all sharing, and my heart feels so full. So it's like, in the beginning, it was like, you traveled halfway around the world for what? And I realized at the end, yes, I traveled halfway around the world to find more of myself, to feel even more whole and more healed than when I arrived, and like humbled, grateful, like grounded and still. So it's just absolutely stunning. I think we need more places like that, more organizations like Compassionate Mental Health, or that organization supported in more places, so that we can create such beautiful spaces of healing and safety and love, so that people can start to experience like this collective self and this connection, this sense of belonging, this like kinship and camaraderie that comes from sharing in our pain and being able to like hold and heal each other through that connection. So I'm deeply honored and grateful that I got to experience something so incredible. And I'm feeling refreshed and renewed and ready for the next chapter.